I waited at my hotel all day. My wife didn't show. I called her cell phone once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail every time. On the 4th try, her boyfriend answered. "Stop fucking calling," he snarled. "You'll live to regret it." He hung up. I sent her an email. Subject, ? I'm in Ellie. You're not answering your phone, and you didn't show up. Are you coming? All I want is a fresh start. It will be hard, but I think we can put all of this behind us. Maybe we can act like none of this shit ever happened? I'm willing to give it a shot. I know we have a complicated history, but we can do it. I dream about meeting you for the first time again. A clean slate. I'm here. I awake on Tuesday morning, still no sign of my wife. I pick up my phone and dial her number again, even after the dire warning of the guy in Colorado. No rings, it goes straight to voicemail. I leave her a short message. "You never showed," I said. "I don't get it." I search for more words, but none come. I hang up, and my head was flooded with thoughts and emotions. That maybe the woman in white had found her. Maybe the Colorado guy had stopped my wife from going. And I was all alone in Ellie, Minnesota, with a car full of camping gear and a permit for 2. Then another thought entered my head, and it washed away all the other ones. This was my fault. All of it. I was too much of a fuck-up to put it all together, but I regretted every choice I made the last few months. I needed to get my shit together. I sent my wife another email. No subject. I'm going in. Maybe you'll be here when I return to civilization on Thursday. I grabbed what was left of my case of beer and went to the bathroom. I opened each remaining can, about 8 or 10, and dumped each can down the drain. As the booze swirled and vanished, a slight load was lifted from my shoulders. I knew kicking the habit was more than just dumping a few cans of Coors Light down the sink, but damn it, it was a start. I checked out of my hotel and drove to the Outfitters. Even though my wife wasn't here, I was doing it anyway. I was going to follow through with something, and I was going to clear my head. I was going fucking camping. An Outfitter employee helped me tie my rented canoe to my car, and I drove another 50 minutes to my drop-in zone. I dumped my boat into the water, and a park ranger helped me load my bag of gear into the middle of the canoe. He grimaced as he did so. "That's a pretty heavy bag for one guy," he said. "Just what do you got in this thing anyway?" I just shrugged, slightly embarrassed. I didn't tell him that I had packed for 2. I paddled all day following my map. I wanted seclusion. As the day progressed, I saw less and less paddlers and campers. At the beginning of my voyage, every site along my route was taken. By midday, the sites were hit or miss. By evening, I found a lake that I had all to myself. There were 5 other sites dotted around the lake, but none of them were taken. I chose a site on a small island. Exhausted from paddling and portaging all day, I dumped my gear on shore and laid down. I stared up at the cloudy sky. I was finally alone. I set up my tent and munched on some Cliff Bars and trail mix. I was too tired to fish or make a fire. I laid down in my sleeping bag inside the tent, hearing nothing but loon calls and the gentle sounds of waves on rocks. I slept for a while, and then woke up in the middle of the night. I turned over on my side, and I just stared at my pack in the corner of my tent. It started to rock, ever so slightly. I squinted my eyes, and it moved again, gently rocking. And then I heard the zipper slowly begin to unzip, one tooth at a time. I squinted harder, unable to move, paralyzed in the darkness. A pale finger reached out of my bag, and then another. A hand reached out from the opening and grabbed the zipper from the outside, and the hand pulled it open even further. A wrist, an elbow, an entire arm now. Hair fell from the bag onto the tent floor, and I heard slight breathing. Panting. I'd heard this panting before. The zipper opened halfway, and the woman in white wiggled out. Her body was folded up like a goddamn human origami. Her knees were next to her head, but her feet pointed in opposite directions. Her left arm was bent behind her, and her hand reached around and rested on her stomach. She tried to unfold, and as she did, I heard bones cracking. But she couldn't unfold. She panted harder, gave up, and began to slide towards my sleeping bag. Her face was covered with hair as she lurched over. She'd reach out her right hand, grip the tent floor, and pull herself towards me, 1 inch at a time. Like a wounded animal. And I just watched her do it. I couldn't fucking move. She was inches away. I felt her cold breath on my face. She moved her head up and down, her scraggly hair brushing against my cheeks. She then spoke her first words since I'd picked her up on that fateful night on that old country road. "Why?" she breathed. "Why?" I felt her tongue tickle the end of my nose, and it worked its way towards my mouth. It stopped on my mouth and worked a circle around my lips. Her tongue felt like an icicle. Her mouth opened, and she exhaled into me. It smelled like a blast of hot garbage. I was finally able to move. My hand trembled upwards, and I moved the hair from her face. My beautiful and smooth woman in white was now a deformed, rotting creature. A small smile formed at the corners of her ragged mouth, and the twisted creature lunged forward. I screamed and shot up in my sleeping bag. My head swiveled quickly, examining all corners of my tent. My camping bag was still in the corner, unopened. I was alone. The woman in white was just a dream. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, unzipped my tent, and tossed the large bag outside as far as I could. I laid in fear all night, barely getting any sleep at all. I left the tent at first light. I watched the sunrise from a large rock on the island's edge. I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out the moose keychain I had purchased the day before. It was an exact replica of the one I'd lost, and it made me think of my wife. I decided that I didn't deserve her. I was a damn nutcase, and a fool to boot. But I'd do anything to win her back. But this woman in white, this woman that I'd got into bed with, she wouldn't let me move on. She'd always haunt me, even though I was trying to let her go. Maybe I'd never be able to let her go. But damn it, I was going to try. I stood and walked to my camping bag. It laid next to some trees in the same spot I'd thrown it in the middle of the night. I cautiously unzipped it and reached inside. My hands fell upon pots, pans, clothes, a bag of freeze-dried food, a small tackle box, and then I felt the familiar fabric. It was thin and ratty. I pulled it out. It was the white dress. I swore I had left it in the attic, but in my haste to split town, I must have thrown it in the pack. Maybe the woman in white had somehow made me do it. I made a fire and tossed the fucking thing into the flames. I watched it burn up, and I felt a release. It was the same release as when I'd watched my beer circle around and vanish down the drain. Maybe I was free. I tossed my line in that morning and caught quite the haul. I cleaned my catch and ate like a king that day. I cleaned up, buried the bones and fish heads in the woods, and relaxed in my tent with a book. I waited all night for the woman in white to come back. Every sound outside my tent was her walking around. each small gust of wind was her brushing against my tent from the outside. She didn't come. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a scream. A terrible, God-forsaken, blood-curdling scream. A woman's scream. And then there was silence. It came from across the lake. I bounded from my tent and dragged my canoe to the water. I pushed off from shore and guided my canoe by moonlight towards the direction of the scream. I was too curious. I reached the middle of the lake. It was so quiet you could hear the stars shining. There were no more screams, no commotion. I floated for 20 minutes just listening. Nothing. I paddled back to my campsite and slept like a baby. On Thursday, I packed up. I felt like a new man. I wasn't sure that I'd exorcised the woman in white from my life completely, but just the chance that I had filled me with something that I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I loaded up my canoe and I shoved off. I floated past another camper fishing in the lake. He had just arrived on my lake last night. He apologized to me, just in case his wife had woken me up in the middle of the night. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh, she just had a nightmare," he said. "I was telling ghost stories by the fire. Have you heard the one about the woman in white?" I lied and said that I hadn't. I paddled all day and docked my canoe in the early evening at the same place that I had dropped in. The same ranger happened to be there, and he helped me out of my canoe. He lifted my bag out and smiled. "Either I'm getting stronger, or this bag of yours got a whole lot lighter," he said. I just smiled. I couldn't lie. This was the lightest I'd felt in months, I told him, and he just shook his head and laughed. I drove back to Ellie, excited to grab a large burger and fries. I parked and walked to a little eatery with outdoor seating that I'd seen when I was in town earlier in the week. I was 20 feet away from the restaurant when I stopped, and my jaw just about hit the pavement. It was my wife, sitting alone at a table. I hadn't seen her in months, and she looked great. Her hair was shorter, and her skin was radiating like never before. She had come after all. I couldn't believe it. She looked around like she was looking for someone. Waiting for someone, actually. She was waiting for me. I approached her, and she looked up at me and nervously smiled. The moose keychain was still in my pocket, and I pulled it out. I remembered what I wrote to her in that email, and it was all coming true. The way she looked at me, I knew that we had no past. No instances of stupid fighting, no name-calling, no guy in Colorado. This was it. We were starting brand new, like we were meeting for the first time all over again. I sat down at her table. "Hi, I'm Jackson," I said, barely containing my knowing grin. My wife blushed, and she looked away slightly. She noticed the moose keychain dangling from my hand, and then she looked at me and smiled. "I'm Emily." Finally, a fresh start.